Winston sank his arms to his sides and slowly refilled his lungs with air. His mind slid away into the labyrinthine world of doublethink. To know and not to know, to be conscious of complete truthfulness while telling carefully constructed lies, to hold simultaneously two opinions which cancelled out, knowing them to be contradictory and believing in both of them, to use logic against logic, to repudiate morality while laying claim to it, to believe that democracy was impossible and that the party was the guardian of democracy, to forget whatever it was necessary to forget, then to draw it back into memory again at the moment when it was needed, and then promptly to forget it again. And above all, to apply the same process to the process itself. That was the ultimate subtlety. Consciously to induce unconsciousness, and then once again to become unconscious of the act of hypnosis you had just performed. Even to understand the word doublethink involved the use of doublethink.
Groupthink. We've all heard the term before, and it's actually pretty self-explanatory. They did a good job naming this one. It's not overly academic. Groupthink. You know what that means? It's groupthink. The term was first coined in 1971, but we've known about it forever. It's not a new phenomenon. He just coined the term. And what it does is specifically refers to how groups think. Groupthink, see? I love it when academic words actually make sense. George Carlin has a great bit about this, how they water down the meaning of words until people can't really understand it. Groupthink is kind of a catch-all phrase for toxic social behavior. Now, humans are social creatures. We discussed this before, and it seems as though our greatest strength, which is our ability to communicate in groups, is also our greatest weakness. Our ability to not think properly in groups. The sociability of humans is twofold. Although groupthink has become a catch-all for all forms of toxic group behavior, really what it means is when the individuals within the group suspend critical thinking in order to fit in with the group. Here, I'll give you an example of what is and what is not groupthink. Okay, not groupthink. I like pink. My friends have pink hair. I want to dye my hair pink too. Cute. You do you. You do you. That's fine. Groupthink. I like pink. I want to dye my hair pink, even though there are toxic chemicals in the pink hair dye that will harm me later. I still gonna dye my hair pink because that would make the group happy and that would make the group like me more. See, there's a difference between conformity and just wanting to be like other people because that's cool, those are the trends, that's whatever, and not thinking clearly so that you can fit in with these people, actually suspending all of the skills that your parents and your teachers put into your brain, all of the thinking skills, all of the logic, all of this stuff, just being like, you know what, whatever. What's more important is that people like me. Health be damned. Cancer schmancer, right? I don't know. Is smoking cigarettes, is that groupthink? Is that just peer pressure? This is interesting. Now, the pink hair, that's more of an obvious example. It's very simple. In our lifetimes, we have seen groupthink do terrible, terrible damage. You remember the Iraq War? Who's old enough to remember the Iraq War? I guess everybody remembers the Iraq War because it's still going on 20 years later. Sorry, 16 years later. Oh no, we pulled out in 2011. Whatever. We all remember the Iraq War. But leading up to the Iraq War, what caused the Iraq War is that everybody collectively lost their goddamn mind. I'll bleep that out. But everybody collectively lost their minds. They weren't thinking clearly. A lot of people knew the Bush administration was lying. Other countries seemed to know the Bush administration was lying. All of France knew, and we were just like, no, freedom fries now, screw France. Like France didn't just give us the Statue of Liberty. Like, how ungrateful we are. But that's what it was. It was a collective mass groupthink problem, and it got us in this quagmire of a war, and it created so many social problems that Europe is still dealing with now. We're not dealing with it. We're over here. Refugees can't get over here. We're dealing with the stuff that we did in Central and South America. We're not really dealing with the stuff we did in the Middle East. So I should make an apology video. It's just like, no, George W. should make an apology video. I don't have to make an apology video. I didn't go in. I was a kid. They said Saddam had WMDs. The real intelligence shows that we don't know if he has WMDs. Colin Powell went before the UN, lied, said he had weapons of mass destruction. The New York Times.
You wrote an article. This is September 8th, 2011, right? This was the big article. It said, U.S. says Hussein intensifies quest for A-bomb parts.
You mean Michael Gordon and I wrote an article?
Sure.
Yeah.
Front page of the New York Times next to a giant picture of Never Forget 9/11. It was right around the first, there it is, in memory of 9/11, front page.
Now, we had the privilege of not being here for 9/11. We were actually in Lahore, Pakistan, while my mom was doing her research on language. So we didn't get caught up in the 9/11 hysteria, which could have been a part of it. But when we came back, we knew that the adults were not thinking rationally. And we were children. They'd gone mad. It showed that these people who are supposed to be responsible simply cannot be trusted to make rational decisions. They can't be trusted to make rational decisions about the most important things, which is our rights, whether we should go to war, whether we should launch an offensive war. And during Iraq, the adults, they simply weren't thinking. And this is a result of groupthink, where people collectively suspended their own critical thinking to go along with just this wave. Just this wave of hysteria. But that was really unsettling when we came back from Lahore and we saw the way things were in the United States because September 11th had happened. And then I just remember thinking that there is no rationality objectively. Yeah, we'll find out in 20, 30 years what the truth was, maybe, but it won't matter. Basically, the Iraq War was an example in our lifetimes of groupthink gone awry, which ended with the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis and a few Americans.
American foreign policy is horrendous, because not only will America come to your country and kill all your people, but what's worse, I think, is that they'll come back 20 years later and make a movie about how killing your people made their soldiers feel sad. Oh, boo-hoo.
Shame. That was shame. And it's not funny. It was shameful. Back to groupthink. Some groups are more likely to succumb to groupthink than others. Groups that are highly based on identity, like not what you do, not what you think, but who you are. We all have this us versus them to some degree because everybody can't be in our tribe. Let's just be honest. We don't have the mental energy to think about everybody. So we associate with the group, and the group protects somewhat. You know, ideally, that group, that tribe would be the whole of the United States of America, and we would all be on the same page, but that is not what has happened. Unfortunately, we have separated into more and more tribes based on identity, and it's us versus them, and it's gotten very hostile. Now, groups that are hostile to outsiders are also more likely to succumb to groupthink. Because you can be in a group and not hate other people. Like, you can have a clique at school and not hate the whole school, but when you get to the point where we're the number one clique, we're the ones that should dictate the actions of everyone. We're going to plan this homecoming party, and everyone's just going to go along with it. Obviously, simple example, but I wanted to tone it down after Iraq. This is where you start to get into trouble, when you get this us versus them, this we should be mean to outsiders kind of thing. You can be in a group that's not toxic. There are plenty of non-toxic groups that exist, but always be careful, because groups can get to be very toxic, and it happens so slowly that you might not notice it, and you may have gotten very comfortable with the security of the group that you don't want to say, hey, this is toxic. These people are acting in ways that I don't support, or I was raised better than this, but you are so now in the group, it's your identity, it's your security, that you're not willing to say, hey, maybe we took it too far. There you go. Suspend critical thinking. There's this book I got for cult research, because you know I do cult stuff. I have cult videos. There's a whole cult playlist. Go check that out. But there's this book that I got for cult research called Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. Can you see this? Anyway, this edition is from 1852. I believe the first edition was from 1844, but don't quote me on that. So basically, we knew all this in 1852. This isn't new. We knew that crowds go mad. We just keep doing it. We're like, it doesn't matter what people tell us. It doesn't matter what warnings our ancestors leave for us. We're going to screw up anyway. We might do it in a more watered down fashion. Like, we're not burning witches anymore, but wait for it. I've seen some stuff online recently that I'm like, wow, y'all would burn a witch, wouldn't you? Of course, they hide it in the fact that it's, you know, they're scientific or they're enlightened or they're this or they're that. It's like, get out of here with all of that stuff. Because if you look through the history, you knew everybody said that they were burning the witch for the greater good. They were lynching the person for the greater good. Everybody believed they were doing it for the greater good. So what is in the Madness of Crowds from 1852? What did he know about alchemists? Alchemists is interesting because alchemists were also scientists. They didn't really split them up back in the day. It was science and magic. They were kind of together. And then around the Enlightenment, around that time, they were like, hey, science is its own thing. We have the scientific method. And then magic kind of split off from that. So alchemy is actually really interesting. What else is in here? Witch mania. Yeah. I'm going to do a whole series on the witch trials, like whatever. Because that was people in the towns burning their cousins, their sisters, their neighbors, accusing them of witchcraft and burning them at the stake, where the whole town would gather around to watch these women, sometimes men, but watch these women being burned alive. And in England, we discussed this, they hanged their witches, so people would gather around to watch the hangings. Same thing in Massachusetts, they hanged their witches. So this was entertainment for them, bunch of psychopaths. But they weren't psychopaths, because we talked about this with Dr. Donald. If everybody's doing it, you're not crazy. You're sane. And I guess if you can identify groupthink and you can be like, guys, you are all crazy, then that makes you the crazy one. You can't win. You just can't win. And now, modern day, people will look at other people and say, why don't you help? Why don't you help the community? Why don't you help the group? This group can't even help themselves. We're going to help. This is how you end up getting burned, trying to help. I don't mean that. I do not mean that. I really don't. That's the most cynical part of me says that. But I really don't mean that. But I understand people who are just like, I'm not going to do it. I'm not getting involved. Why should I help the group? Why should I damage my reputation to help people that aren't worth helping? I get it. I see people out there right now ruining their careers just trying to speak truth. And to what avail? Their careers are going to be over. Maybe in 20 or 30 years, someone will say, you know what? That person was right. Groupthink. We're back to groupthink. And why, despite the fact that these people would burn you at the stake, we're supposed to help them. Just warning signs, because you might be like, I would never be susceptible to groupthink. Yes, you would. We all would. We all have been. And I really think that if I were in the United States for September 11th, I would have gotten caught up in the whole groupthink too. I came back, I felt like an outsider. I was looking around at all these people like, y'all have lost your mind. Didn't we have values? I left in, I think, 2000 or early 2001. We left in like January of 2001 or December of 2000. And I was like, didn't we used to have values? Was I remembering wrong? We didn't have values, but when I came back, all of that had gone out the window. We didn't have values anymore. Anyway, so how can you watch out for groupthink? First off, watch out for people saying, we're all in this together and they're the enemy. And who's we? Do you pay my bills? A lot of these we's are temporary. Now, this applies to cliques in high school. This applies to work groups. This applies to college groups. This applies to whatever. These we's fall apart real fast. Now, like I said, like in World War II, where the country has to come together, to fight a real enemy, yes, we need to have we need to coalesce around something. But that same pattern repeats when it's not World War II, when it's something small, and now it just becomes us versus them. So that should set off an alarm bell in your ear when you say, we're in this together and they're the enemy. Not saying it's not true, just question it. When I say these groups are temporary, I think back to a lot of young people, maybe a lot of teenagers who go along with criminal activity because their friends are doing it, and then they get arrested and they say, well, you know, I was just a getaway driver, or I didn't pull the trigger, or he told me to pull the trigger. It's too late. It doesn't matter then. You got to question beforehand and say, oh, this is stupid. This could give me 20 years. I'm not going to do that. Because, yeah, you might be a group in that car to go hold up the liquor store or whatever, but that group is going to fall apart when they throw you all in the penitentiary. You're not a group anymore. And you suffer. You, the individual, suffers for what you thought was a group. Y'all thought you were a clique. You thought you were a gang. You thought you were in this together forever and ever. No, they're probably going to turn on you. They're probably going to blame the whole thing on you if they can. This is coming off as so cynical, but I just want to say what I know to be true is that this we thing can be very temporary. It can be very circumstantial. It can be very situational. So watch out for the we. And watch out, will the we survive when the situation changes, when your circumstance changes? Is there still going to be a we? And are you going to get in trouble for what you did to them? Sometimes no. A lot of these people who burn the witches, no consequences. No consequences at all. That's just fantastic. In doing research for this video, I found a lot of stuff about business and corporate groups, and because there's money in that sort of research, of course it makes a lot of sense because you want your team to work together. And when you are working in a team, especially in your workforce, the problems are very imminent. The problems are very imminent. It's very in your face. Now we are online, we watch through the TV, and it got me to thinking, is our technology, is the social media, is the television, is back in the day the radio, is that bringing us all into one group? It's coming into our living room, it's coming directly into our brain, and so it's making it more in your face and more imminent, these problems that don't necessarily need to be as in your face. Is the media creating a group? And we've seen that. We've seen these cliques online. We've seen these little niches form online. However, you got to think, okay, so in the 1930s, the radio made this group in Germany where it was us versus them. There was a technology of the radio that was getting into people's minds that way, and mass printing, Mein Kampf, going into all these households. It was getting people's minds that way, getting into their sphere through technology. But look, in the 1300s with the plague, they didn't even have the printing press. So it wasn't technology. It wasn't the media that made them act this way. Now, so I don't know if we should blame the media. We kind of addressed this question in the We Were Warned 35 years ago and we didn't listen video about amusing ourselves to death, is how much can you really blame the media? Would we just be doing this anyway? We are kind of that way, you know, people are not perfect. We are not a perfect species. So now, of course, my education comes from Western history, American history, some European history. So I'm not sure if this applies to all groups everywhere. I doubt other people are better than us. Just looking at mass graves found from other people as well. Like, I strongly suspect, and I would put money, this is how we are. We're just not, this is how we are. We just accept it. Yeah, so would they have done it anyway? Do we need the media to make us ratchet? Are we just naturally ratchet? And with social media, the pressures are directly in our face. They're in our pockets and they're 24/7. So we think that the them is more of a threat than they are. If you were to turn off social media, would there be a them? Would there be an us? That's scary. Because a lot of people's identity is formed around what they have found online. That's a question a lot of people will not be able to ask themselves and answer honestly. Every hashtag has the potential for a fight. Every last one is a potential for groupthink. Even the terminology, viral. Every hashtag is a potential for a group virus. Every hashtag Could be a witch burning. It seems recently that if it's not one thing, it's another. If we're not classified in groups for one thing, then it's classified in groups for another. We're always in a group. It's always us versus them. That this group think is never ending. And we can't step outside the bounds of our group, because once people step outside the bounds of their group, there is nobody to protect them anymore. If you're on the blue team and you always take the blue team line, the blue team will defend you. If you're on the red team and you always take the red team line, the red team will defend you. Now, you say something that is what you believe, but not what other people believe, and they'll just leave you hanging. This is actually quite scary recently, and I know it's happened before, but at least now we know it's happening more and more because technology has just brought it there. That groupthink is a constant problem in our lives right now because of social media. And even if you're not on social media, reporters are. That's how our news system works. So they're on social media and they are deciding what the conversation is. So it's really hard to get away from it. You can't just ignore it and say, oh man, whatever, that's stupid. Man, screw that Hitler guy, I don't care. Eventually it's going to come and affect you, whether you want it to affect you or not. It's basically the culture war, where whatever happens is getting caught up into the culture war. And we've been fighting a culture war since before there was social media. The culture war, the social media just went into the culture war and sort of exacerbated the culture war. It was going on from before social media. So I personally believe that the culture war itself, not the battles within the culture war, but the culture war itself is the biggest threat to the United States. I'm going to make a whole video on that, so we're not going to go into it right now. But just know that. To understand what's happening, must understand that we are in the midst of a culture war. So groupthink is a great, it's a fun idea. It's a great thought experiment. It's fun to read this book with this goofy guy on the cover and laugh. But we also have to take into consideration that we are smack dab in the middle of a culture war. Also about groupthink, groupthink is more likely in high stress environments. Examples of that stress would be famine, plague, preteen years. You got to think about this too. Think about this. How does this group treat heretics? If a person says, I don't agree, will it accept them? Will it say, why don't you agree? What do you have to add to this? Or are they going to be like ISIS and say, behead them? Like Scientology and track them down. How does the group treat heretics? That can show you if the group that you're in is toxic or not. If you're in that car and it's too late and they're going to hurt you if you don't go along with it, I don't know what to tell you. You shouldn't have gotten in that car. That's why you have to look at the warning signs and the red flags before you get involved in this group. And as soon as the red flags go off, as soon as the alarms go off, you got to be like, nah, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be involved with this, and safely remove yourself from the situation, because it can get pretty bad. If you're in that box going down river, what can you do? You're already in the box. This leads me to probably one of the most important points in how groupthink takes effect is that people self-censor. People know the truth and they don't say it, or they won't even allow themselves to consider the truth because it goes against the narrative of the group. What's the point of all of our education? What is the point of what we just spend all these school loans on if we're not going to use it to make some sense, even to ourselves? So this is probably the biggest warning sign when members within the group find themselves censoring themselves. A lot of times they don't even see that they're doing it. There's huge cognitive dissonance. They can't even see what's happening. And if you've seen a friend go down this path, cults do this a lot. This is why it's important to learn how to think and not what to think. We gotta fall back on what we know is true, which is the scientific method, which is logic and reason. See, we have to be able to agree on basic truths. There has to be an underlying reality. There has to be an objective reality. Reality exists even if reality doesn't exist within that group. If it's like the Iraq War, if it's like Americans going crazy with the Iraq War, what were the consequences for us?
You hear me? No comeuppance!
One hilarious note to groupthink is the ABILENE paradox. The ABILENE paradox, discovered by a Professor Harvey, basically says that some people will go along with what the group wants, even though it's not what they want, because they feel it's what the group wants. And in reality, nobody in the group actually wants this thing. They just think everybody else wants this thing. Okay, here's one. The group wants to go out to eat. Someone suggests Mexican, just to say it. All right, let's starting point, Mexican. Nobody wants Mexican food. They just had Mexican food for lunch. But everybody in the group thinks everybody in the group wants Mexican. So they say, yeah, Mexican. I'll take Mexican. So everybody goes out for Mexican. Nobody wanted Mexican to begin with. And then afterwards, they'll say, oh, wasn't that great? Nobody wanted that. They just didn't want to be the Debbie Downer. They didn't want to be the negative Nancy. They didn't want to be the one to say, hey, I don't want Mexican. What if half the people in the crowd watching that witch burn were like, I don't believe in witchcraft. These people seem to believe in witchcraft. If they believe in witchcraft, I'll say I believe in witchcraft. Ooh, I know that lady. She's definitely not a witch. In fact, she birthed my child. Ooh, hope I don't get pregnant again. Who's gonna birth my child now? It's not funny, haha. R.I.P. to all the witches who burned. So we know groupthink is a problem. We know that we are getting caught up in it every single day. We know that we see our friends and family getting caught up in it. What do? Simple. Play devil's advocate. Always play devil's advocate. Take the other side. What is the best point on the other side? Don't be like, well, they think this crazy out there straw man thing. What do they really believe? What can you not refute? We used to do this in debate all the time. In debate, what we had to do was always take the other side. It didn't matter. We didn't know what side we were going to take. We had to make the case for both affirmative and negative. And it was fun. It was a fun thing we did. So that's basically playing devil's advocate. I don't care what the proposition was. We had to be able to support it and to refute it. And we were there to win. So you couldn't just throw the game on some ideological stuff. You got up there and you made the best point you could. And so we did. And it was fun and we had a good time and it was high school and we went out and we got pizza afterwards. Terrible pizza, but the pizza we could afford because we were high schoolers and didn't really care. But it's fun. Play devil's advocate. If you play devil's advocate and the devil has you convinced, you got to be willing to say, yo, I don't know. A lot of people aren't willing to play devil's advocate because I feel that they are afraid that they will change their own mind. So they don't even think about it. They don't even go there. But do it. Play devil's advocate and be willing to look at the other side honestly, to give it an honest take. Is there a God? I don't know. Is there life after death? I don't know. Is the earth flat? No. No, because what is their best point? Okay, refute it. Earth not flat. That shows your opponent that you respect their side enough to give it a fair shake and to not just take the most ridiculous meme that they've put out and say, well, this is what you all believe, because they're not going to trust you. Other signs that groupthink is about to become dangerous is there pressure for you to do something right now. If we don't burn these witches, God will be mad at us and we have to burn them right now. Right now? What if we think about it and burn them tomorrow? I mean, the weather's going to be better tomorrow. We're going to have a lot of sun next week. Why don't we think about it and we burn them then? Why do we got to burn these witches right now? Right now? Right now? Because if once you do something, you can't undo something. This is not how this thing works. You break a glass, you can't unbreak a glass. You can't unburn a witch. Anyway, so that's a warning sign that maybe this groupthink has gotten out of hand, that there's pressure for you to do something right this minute. It's a common sales tactic. If you've gotten caught up in groupthink and you are lucky enough to recognize what has happened, count yourself lucky, because now you know. Now, once that happens, you might not be in the group anymore. You might be too smart to be in the group. You might just be like, I don't like this. I don't want to be a part of this anymore. And you might lose friends. You might lose your identity group. Were they really your identity group?
You're wearing sweatpants. It's Monday.
So?
So that's against the rules, and you can't sit with us.
Whatever. Those rules aren't real.
If you realize that you are in a cult and you can find a way to escape, do it. Maybe if the cult's bad for you, I don't know. Sometimes you just got to be like, yo, I'm in this cult now and I can't stand these people, but this is where I live. How many old people just can't stand the people around them? However, if you are a very strong-willed person, just break away and try to make it right the best you can. Now, if you accused your preschool teacher of molesting you in some sort of satanic ritual and that person is in prison, You should probably cop to it as soon as possible. Yes, we did that. Yes, we did that in the 80s. The whole of the country got caught up in satanic mass hysteria in the 80s, put these people on trial, took their whole livelihoods, ruined their reputation. We do this stuff all the time. I wish they could seance this guy, this McKay. They should seance him and be like, yo, can you do an updated edition? I want to hear your take on it. Rolling over at his grave. He's like, do not even talk to me. Do not seance me. He would be so rude. Don't even get him on a Ouija board. He doesn't want to talk to you. Because he tried to warn us, we didn't listen. So, but yeah, we do it. We do it all the time. So if your groupthink has caused considerable harm to another person, just say you're sorry. I mean, if they are in prison because you accused them of molesting you in preschool, you were in preschool, it's not really your fault. So, fruit basket. If they've been in prison since the 80s, you probably want to sign them up for a wine of the month club. Just something that says, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Sorry I did that. Ooh. So if you've been lucky enough to see through groupthink and you see that the group you're in is toxic, it's very identity based, it's very us versus them, and that the outsiders are wicked and they behead heretics or whatever your group might do. Maybe they start rumors or whatever. Your friend group might be incredibly toxic. Ignorance is bliss sometimes. But whatever, count yourself lucky. Your duty is now to try to stop groupthink from happening. Your job went from being extra with a pitchfork, number 4, to being devil's advocate. Now, extra with a pitchfork, number 4, pays SAG day rate. Devil's advocate pays in sorrow. And I gotta say, sometimes it's not worth it to go against the group. This is an honest channel. I'll be perfectly honest with you. If you are in the crowd and everybody is burning a witch, is it worth it for you to say, hey, witchcraft isn't real? Maybe you'll help her. Maybe they will burn you too. Subscribe.